The wedding album lay open on Aunt Maxine's coffee table, a glossy monument to betrayal. I stood frozen, fingers tingling into numbness as I stared at my brother Nolan, beaming beside his new wife. The same brother whose wedding I was supposed to attend tomorrow. "Elise, honey, I thought you knew." Aunt Maxine's voice wavered behind me, thick with something worse than pity, guilt. The carefully wrapped crystal frame slipped from my hands. The shattering glass echoed through the living room, a sharp, physical sound that matched what was happening inside my chest. Shards scattered across the hardwood floor, catching the afternoon sunlight pouring through the bay windows. "That's not possible," I whispered. My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "I have the invitation right here." I fumbled through my purse, pulling out the thick cream envelope, my name written in elegant calligraphy. I held it up like proof of existence. "Look, June 15th, tomorrow." Aunt Maxine took the invitation with trembling hands, her reading glasses sliding to the tip of her nose. She stared at it for a long moment before her shoulders sagged. "Oh, Elise." Her voice broke. "The wedding was last weekend. They sent you the wrong date, on purpose." The room tilted. I had taken a day off from my executive marketing position to prepare. Spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, the right dress, rehearsing polite conversations with family members who barely acknowledged me. I had told myself this invitation meant something, that maybe, finally, they wanted me there. "How can they be so cruel?" I asked. Aunt Maxine hesitated, then straightened her spine. "They decided it would be easier if you weren't there." The memory of receiving that envelope came rushing back. Standing at my mailbox, sunlight catching the gold embossing, my fingers tracing my name, hope fluttering in my chest. I had allowed myself to believe this was healing. I remembered the family dinner 2 months earlier when Nolan announced his engagement. His eyes swept across the room, meeting everyone's gaze except mine. I had still smiled, still congratulated him, still pretended not to notice. That weekend, I had driven to 3 different stores searching for a dress. Something elegant, not showy. Something that said I belonged. The saleswoman had commented on my glowing smile as I stood before the mirror, believing, foolishly, that this time would be different. Now I knelt on the floor, carefully gathering the broken shards of crystal. When Aunt Maxine bent to help, I shook my head. "Let me." My hands trembled, but my voice steadied. They've always treated me like I was invisible. Now they've made it official. For once, I didn't soften their cruelty with excuses. I didn't explain it away. Something shifted inside me, like a tectonic plate finally breaking free after years of pressure. "I fought with your mother about this," Aunt Maxine said, wringing her hands. "I told her it was wrong, cruel, but she said you'd bring up uncomfortable topics, ask embarrassing questions." I almost laughed. Uncomfortable topics, like the thousands of dollars I had quietly funneled through my holding company to keep the family Lake Cottage from foreclosure. Embarrassing questions, like why Nolan's business failures were endlessly forgiven while my successes were dismissed as luck. "I thought if I achieved enough," I said softly, wrapping the broken pieces in the unused gift paper. "If I helped enough, they'd finally see me." Aunt Maxine squeezed my hand. "Some people can't see what's right in front of them. Not won't, can't." The realization settled deep and heavy. No achievement would ever be enough. No sacrifice would make them love me the way I had spent my life trying to earn. I looked again at the wedding album, at the smiling faces celebrating without me. My absence was so complete they hadn't even needed to erase me. They had chosen, long before this wedding. Perhaps it was time I made my own choice. And I would. I would no longer be invisible. The next day, the steering wheel felt slick beneath my palms as I pulled into my parents' circular driveway. Their Tudor-style home stood pristine against the afternoon sky, hedges manicured, windows gleaming, betraying nothing of the rot inside. I turned off the engine but stayed seated, watching through the bay window. They lounged in the living room, surrounded by wedding photos. My mother's laughter drifted out, that delicate tinkling sound I had spent decades trying to earn. My father reclined in his leather chair, relaxed in a way I rarely saw. Nolan stood by the mantel, holding up a framed wedding portrait. "Best decision we made," he said loudly, "was making sure she wasn't there to ruin everything like always." Nausea surged as I opened the door. They laughed, flipping pages, oblivious to me standing in the entryway. 3 minutes passed before my mother noticed. "Elise." Not a greeting, not a question, just acknowledgement of an inconvenience. "The wedding was last weekend," I said. "You sent me the wrong date." Nolan didn't even look up. "I needed one perfect day without you." The simplicity of his cruelty struck harder than any argument. "You've always disrupted our peace," my mother added, adjusting her pearls. "We needed one occasion without your intensity." My father said nothing. His silence was approval dressed as cowardice. I stepped further into the room. They sat comfortably while I stood. The family dynamic perfectly staged. "I've put thousands of dollars into the lake cottage," I said. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice you telling people it was still yours?" Mother waved her hand. "That's what successful children do. They help." Nolan smirked, playing with spreadsheets while the rest of us have real careers. Their words crystallized the truth. I wasn't family. I was a resource. I caught my reflection in the ornate mirror, shoulders curved, chin dipped, a woman trained to shrink. "How long have you been living like this?" I asked my reflection silently. I opened my purse and removed a slim folder. "Let me explain something you've forgotten." I laid the documents on the table. Mother's face tightened. "What is this?" "Every dollar, every repair, every tax bill." I met her gaze. "And my name is on the deed, sole owner." Confusion crossed my father's face. "You signed it over 3 years ago," I said, "when Nolan needed money again." "You can't," my mother started. "You're welcome to contest it," I interrupted calmly. "But my attorney made sure it's airtight." "My attorney," she scoffed. "Jenna Morales." "Yes," I said, "mine." Walking back to my car minutes later, hands shaking but steps steady, I felt something new. Peace. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. The phone calls started immediately. Cousins I barely knew suddenly concerned about my mental health. Accusations disguised as worry. That night, I opened my laptop. And I documented everything. Every check, every transfer, every unpaid loan. Brick by brick, I built the wall. Days later, my parents appeared unannounced at my office. Tears, accusations, demands. I stayed seated. "I'm not your bank," I said. "I'm done." When Jenna escorted them out, my father looked back once, confused, diminished. The restraining order came through the next morning. Clear pattern of emotional and financial harassment, the judge ruled. Dominoes fell, invitations stopped, whispers spread, Nolan unraveled. A year later, sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my lake house office. No family portraits lined the walls, only landscapes I had photographed, moments that belonged solely to me. Another wedding invitation arrived, cream envelope, calligraphy. I smiled, checked my calendar, and chose myself. That evening, laughter filled my home. Chosen family, real family. Later, I opened my father's final letter. "I failed you," it read. I placed it in a box, not destroyed, not displayed, simply acknowledged. Healing, I realized, isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's peace. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and never look back. The silence after that choice was unfamiliar. No constant buzzing phone, no guilt-soaked voicemails, no sudden emergencies designed to pull me back into orbit, just quiet. At first, the quiet felt dangerous, like standing on the edge of something vast without knowing whether it would hold me or swallow me whole. I woke up reaching for my phone out of habit, my body still trained to anticipate chaos. Nothing came. Weeks passed. The restraining order did its job. My parents stopped appearing at my office. Nolan stopped calling when money ran dry. The family group chat went dormant, like a body that had finally admitted it was dead. And then came the withdrawal. Not theirs, mine. I realized how much of my identity had been built around reacting to them. Fixing things, anticipating needs, bracing for disappointment. Without that constant tension, I didn't know what to do with myself. On a Saturday morning, I stood in my kitchen holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring out at the lake. The water was perfectly still. No ripples, no boats, no voices telling me what I should be doing. For the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had never dared to voice. What do I want? Not what would keep the peace, not what would earn approval, not what would prevent another family crisis. What do I want? The answer didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. I wanted rest without apology. I wanted laughter that didn't feel earned. I wanted to stop explaining myself. I wanted to live without shrinking. The next Monday, I made a decision that surprised even me. I submitted my resignation. My boss stared at me across the conference table, stunned. "You're at the top of your game, Elise. We were discussing your next promotion." "I know," I said calmly. "That's why now is the right time." "What are you going to do?" I smiled, a real one. "Build something that's mine." 3 months later, my boutique consultancy opened its doors. Smaller team, selective clients, no chaos disguised as urgency. I worked fewer hours and slept better than I had in a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I stopped bleeding myself dry for people who didn't value me, success came more easily. One afternoon, Aunt Maxine visited again. She wandered through my office, fingers trailing along the bookshelves, her eyes lingering on the photographs lining the walls. "You look different," she said finally. "I am," I replied. She nodded. "Your mother tells people you've changed." I laughed softly. "I hope so." "She says you've become cold." I met Aunt Maxine's gaze. "No, I've become warm toward myself." She smiled then. "Good, it suits you." Not everyone approved. At a charity gala later that year, I felt the familiar shift in the air before I even saw them. Whispers, side glances, the subtle recalibration of conversations. My mother stood across the room, surrounded by women who smiled politely but leaned just slightly away from her. She didn't approach me, neither did I. For once, avoidance wasn't painful. It was peaceful. I learned new things about myself that year. That I liked hiking alone at sunrise. That I preferred small dinner parties to crowded holidays. That my laugh sounded different when it wasn't guarded. I also learned something harder. Grief doesn't disappear just because you choose yourself. Some nights, I mourned the family I never had. The parents who should have protected me. The brother who chose convenience over love. I let myself feel it without turning it into a mission to fix them. Grief, I discovered, passes faster when you don't argue with it. Then came the call I didn't expect. It was from my father. Not a demand, not a complaint, just silence on the line at first, followed by a voice that sounded smaller than I remembered. "I don't know how to talk to you," he admitted. "You don't have to," I said gently. "I lost my job," he continued. "The firm downsized. I thought you should know." I waited. No request followed. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Not for losing the job, for how I treated you." I closed my eyes. "I'm not ready for a relationship," I said honestly, "but I hear you." "That's more than I deserve," he replied. We hung up. I didn't rush to tell anyone. I didn't feel the need to turn it into a victory or a reconciliation arc. It was simply a moment. One thread loosened, nothing more. Boundaries, I learned, don't require drama to be effective. They require consistency. A year after the wedding I never attended, I hosted a small gathering at the lake house. No speeches, no obligations, just people who showed up because they wanted to. As the sun set, I stood on the dock, feet dangling over the water, listening to laughter drift behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing. I wasn't invisible. I was present. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance I had claimed. Not property, not money, not revenge. Freedom. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that begins the moment you stop asking to be chosen and choose yourself instead. Freedom settled into my life quietly, without fireworks or dramatic announcements. It arrived in the small moments. In the way I stopped flinching when my phone rang. In the ease with which I declined invitations without inventing excuses. In the relief of realizing I no longer had to justify my existence to anyone. But healing, I learned, is not linear. There were days when an old song on the radio or the smell of my mother's perfume on a stranger would knock the air from my lungs. I would feel 8 years old again, standing in the hallway while Nolan was praised for mediocrity, and I was told to be patient, to be understanding, to be less. On those days, I didn't scold myself for hurting. I sat with it, let it pass through me instead of rooting itself inside. That choice changed everything. My work flourished in ways I hadn't anticipated. Clients didn't just hire my firm for strategy, they stayed because they felt seen. I recognized that hunger in them. Brands desperate to be understood instead of exploited. I gave them what I had once begged for. Authenticity. One afternoon, while reviewing campaign metrics, my assistant paused at my doorway. "There's a young woman here without an appointment," she said. "She says she just needs 5 minutes." I almost said no out of habit, then stopped myself. "Send her in." She couldn't have been more than 22, nervous, overdressed, eyes bright with fear and determination. "I don't want a job," she blurted out. I needed to talk to someone who made it out." "Out of what?" I asked gently. "A family that only loves you when you're useful." The words landed softly, devastatingly. She told me her story in pieces, about being the responsible one, the fixer, the wallet, the emotional dumping ground, about being praised for strength while being denied care. "I'm scared," she admitted. "If I stop helping, I'll have nothing left." I leaned forward. "You won't have nothing," I said. "You'll have yourself, and that's not nothing, it just feels unfamiliar." She left an hour later, shoulders straighter, eyes clearer. Watching her go, I understood something new. My pain had not been wasted. That realization stayed with me. It followed me into meetings, into late-night walks along the lake, into quiet mornings where I drank coffee without rushing. Eventually, it grew into an idea. The mentoring program. It started small. One evening a week, a borrowed conference room, a handful of women who looked like I once did, capable, exhausted, and deeply unsure they were allowed to want more. We talked about boundaries, about money, about guilt disguised as loyalty, about the radical idea that love should not require self-erasure. Some cried, some resisted, all of them listened. And slowly they changed. So did I. Not because I was fixing them, but because I was finally using my strength by choice, not obligation. Then, unexpectedly, my mother reached out. Not through lawyers, not through family emissaries, directly. Her email was short. "I don't understand you anymore, but I miss you." I read it 3 times before closing my laptop. Missing me was not the same as respecting me. I drafted a response, deleted it, drafted another, then stopped. Silence, I realized, was not cruelty, it was clarity. Weeks later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned my parents were selling their house, downsizing, retreating. I felt a flicker of something, sadness maybe, but it didn't take root. Their choices were no longer my responsibility. On the anniversary of the wedding that changed everything, I took myself on a trip. No agenda, no schedule, just a small coastal town where nobody knew my last name. I spent mornings walking along the shore, evenings journaling at cafes, nights falling asleep to the sound of waves. I wrote letters I never sent, forgiveness letters, anger letters, goodbye letters. And then I burned them, not in rage, but in release. One night, as I watched the paper curl into ash, a truth rose up so clearly it startled me. I had spent my life trying to prove I was worthy of love. But love, real love, doesn't need proof. It simply shows up. When I returned home, my life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still hard days, lonely ones, decisions that scared me. But the difference was this. I trusted myself. I no longer asked, will they approve? I asked, will I respect myself afterward? That question became my compass. Months later, a message appeared on my phone from a number I didn't recognize. It was Nalan. I don't expect forgiveness, it read, but I need you to know, losing you cost me more than I realized. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked my phone and set it face down. Some acknowledgments arrived too late to change the past, but just in time to confirm the truth. I had been right to leave. As autumn settled over the lake, painting the water in muted golds and grays, I stood on the dock again, wrapped in a sweater, breathing in the cold air. I was no longer the woman waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I had built my own. And the most powerful thing about it wasn't who sat there with me. It was that I could finally choose. Who enters, who stays, and who never gets access again. Winter arrived quietly, without drama, settling over the lake in a thin sheet of ice that reflected the pale morning sky. I watched it from the window of my office, wrapped in a wool shawl, coffee warming my hands. The stillness felt earned. Life no longer rushed at me with demands disguised as love. It moved at my pace now. The mentoring program grew faster than I expected. Word spread, not through advertising, but through relief. Women told other women, she understands. Sessions filled up. Waiting lists formed. Stories poured in, voices trembling at first, then growing steadier as they spoke truths they had buried for years. One evening, after the last chair was stacked and the lights dimmed, I sat alone in the conference room, overwhelmed by something that felt suspiciously like gratitude. If my family had not broken me so precisely, would I have known how to help these women rebuild? The question lingered. During the holidays, invitations came and went. Office parties, friends, dinners, Aunt Maxine's annual winter brunch. I attended what felt nourishing and declined what felt performative. For the first time, December didn't feel like endurance training. On Christmas morning, my phone buzzed once. A message from my mother. Merry Christmas, Elise. I hope you're well. No guilt, no demand, no accusation. I replied with 2 words. Merry Christmas. And put the phone down. It didn't mean reconciliation. It meant civility, distance without cruelty, boundaries without bitterness. That felt like growth. In January, I received an unexpected email from a publishing house. A junior editor had attended one of my mentoring sessions. She asked if I had ever considered writing. Your way of explaining boundaries, she wrote, feels like language people have been searching for. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Writing had always been my quiet refuge, journals stacked in drawers, notes scribbled on napkins, thoughts never meant for anyone else. Until now. I didn't respond immediately. Fear still had a voice, even if it no longer had control. Who was I to tell this story? What if my family saw it? What if they recognized themselves? Then I remembered something fundamental. Truth doesn't require permission. I said yes. Spring thawed the lake and something else inside me. I began writing early mornings and late nights, letting the story pour out unpolished and honest. Not a revenge narrative, not a plea for understanding. A record of what happens when love is conditional, of what it costs to stay too long, of what it takes to leave. When the first draft was finished, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, and then slowly full. The book wasn't about my family. It was about reclaiming oneself. Around the same time, Kendra reached out again. She had finalized her separation from Nalan. I just wanted to thank you, she said quietly over coffee. Seeing you walk away gave me permission to do the same. I nodded, understanding more than she knew. We don't save people by staying. Sometimes we save them by leaving. As summer returned, so did something unexpected. Joy. Not the loud, performative kind, the steady kind, the kind that doesn't ask for witnesses. I laughed more, slept better, planned things months ahead without dread. I stopped bracing for punishment every time something went well. One afternoon, standing in line at a bookstore, I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back stood straight. Her eyes were calm. Her mouth rested naturally, not pulled into a defensive smile. She looked at home in herself. A letter arrived weeks later. No return address. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Inside, just one sentence. I see now that we loved you for what you gave, not for who you were. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the box with the others, not as proof, not as victory. As closure. Standing on the dock that evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees, I felt the weight of the past loosen its grip completely. Some families teach you how to belong. Others teach you how to leave. Both are lessons. And I had finally learned mine. The morning my book was released, I woke before dawn, not with anxiety but with a quiet sense of readiness. The lake was smooth as glass, the sky just beginning to pale. I stood at the window, breathing in the stillness, and realized something simple and profound. Nothing was missing. For most of my life, I had lived as though something essential had been withheld from me, as though love were a prize I failed to win. Standing there, I understood that I had never been incomplete. I had simply been in the wrong place, asking the wrong people for what they could not give. The response to the book arrived slowly at first, then all at once. Emails from strangers, messages from women who said they had finally put language to their pain, men who admitted they had never considered how deeply conditional love could wound. I read every message. Some made me cry. Others made me sit back and exhale, knowing that the story had landed where it was needed. At a small launch event, a woman in her 60s approached me, gripping her purse with white knuckles. "I waited my whole life for permission to leave," she whispered. "I didn't know I could give it to myself." I took her hands in mine. "You still can," I said. That night, alone again, I didn't feel the familiar emptiness that once followed milestones. I felt rooted. Success no longer triggered fear. Happiness no longer felt temporary. I trusted it to stay. Time softened everything else. My parents faded into the background of my life, not erased, not forgiven, but reclassified. Extended history. No longer central characters, no longer authorities over my worth. Occasionally, a memory surfaced, a birthday forgotten, a compliment withheld, a door quietly closed in my face. I let the memories pass through me like weather. They no longer defined the climate of my life. On the anniversary of the day I had first discovered the truth about the wedding, I hosted a dinner at the lake house. The same table, new meaning. Aunt Maxine sat beside me, her laughter easy. Jenna and Thomas argued playfully about dessert. Friends filled the room with warmth that didn't require performance. As we raised our glasses, Aunt Maxine smiled at me. "You look free," she said. I nodded. "I am." Later that evening, when the house grew quiet and the last car disappeared down the drive, I stepped outside alone. The lake reflected the stars, vast and patient. I thought of the woman I had been, standing in Aunt Maxine Wright's living room, holding a fake invitation, convincing herself that being excluded was somehow her fault. I wished I could reach back through time and touch her shoulder. I would tell her this. You don't need to become smaller to be loved. You don't need to earn your place. You don't need to stay where you are unseen. Some doors close to protect you. Some betrayals free you. And sometimes, the greatest love story of your life is the one where you finally choose yourself. I turned back toward the house, warm light spilling from the windows, and smiled. This was my life now. Not perfect, Not painless, but honest. And that, I knew with certainty, was more than enough.